You feel powerless as situations spiral beyond your control, while others seem to effortlessly navigate chaos and emerge victorious. Every crisis catches you off guard, leaving you reactive and defensive, while you watch certain people maintain composure and somehow turn every challenge into an advantage. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist who mastered the art of controlling any situation through superior positioning and strategic thinking. What I discovered about situational control will transform how you approach every challenge, giving you the power to shape outcomes rather than merely react to them. The battlefield may have changed from ancient China to modern life, but the principles of control and influence remain as powerful today as they were 2,500 years ago. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for strategic mastery. I must tell you about my path to understanding control, for it began with my most humiliating defeats. In my early years as a military commander, I believed that control came from force. From shouting orders and demanding obedience, I commanded through fear and expected immediate compliance. How wrong I was. During my first major campaign in the Wu territories, I led 3,000 men against what I believed was a smaller enemy force. I had studied their numbers, analyzed their weapons, calculated our advantages. Yet within hours of engagement, my army was scattered like leaves in a storm. I watched helplessly as my carefully laid plans crumbled, my soldiers retreated in chaos, and my reputation as a strategist nearly ended before it truly began. That night, sitting alone among the remnants of my defeated force, I held in my hands what would become the foundation of all my future wisdom, the bamboo strategy scrolls. These were not the famous writings you may know, but my original personal notes, where I first began to understand the difference between commanding and controlling. I realized that evening that I had been trying to control the outcome without understanding the situation. I had focused on what I wanted to happen rather than what was actually happening. True control, I discovered, begins with perfect awareness of reality, not wishful thinking about it. I began to observe everything differently. I watched how water flows around rocks, taking the path of least resistance, yet carving through the hardest stone over time. I studied how farmers guided their oxen, not through force, but through understanding the animal's nature. I observed how the wind moves clouds across the sky invisible, yet undeniably powerful. The breakthrough came during my second campaign, when I chose not to attack at all. Instead of rushing into battle, I spent weeks positioning my forces, gathering intelligence, and waiting for the precise moment when victory would require minimal effort. When I finally moved, the enemy surrendered within hours because I had created conditions where resistance was futile. This taught me the supreme principle of control. You master situations not by overpowering them, but by understanding them so completely that the outcome becomes inevitable. The ancient war drum I carried into that battle no longer signaled the beginning of violence. It announced the moment when strategic patience would prove more powerful than sword and spear. The most crucial lesson I learned came not on any battlefield, but in a moment of quiet reflection when I gazed into a bronze mirror, what I now call the mirror of self-knowledge. This simple object taught me that before you can control any situation, you must first achieve complete mastery over yourself. I remember the day this truth nearly cost me everything. We were besieging a fortified city that had resisted us for months. My generals pressed for immediate assault. My soldiers grew restless, and my own impatience burned like fire in my chest. The enemy had insulted my intelligence, mocked my strategy, and questioned my honor. My anger demanded immediate action. Against my better judgment, I ordered the attack. I let my emotions override my strategic mind, and the result was catastrophic. We lost 2,000 men in a single afternoon, accomplished nothing, and revealed our desperation to the enemy. That night, alone in my tent, I confronted the hardest truth a leader can face. I had become my own greatest enemy. I picked up my bronze mirror and truly looked at myself for the first time. What I saw was not a master strategist, but a man controlled by his own passions, his pride, his need for validation. How could I claim to control situations when I could not even control my own responses to them? From that moment, I began the most important campaign of my life, the conquest of my own nature. I developed what I call the 5 gates of self-mastery. The first gate is awareness, knowing your emotional state at every moment. The second is pause, creating space between trigger and response. The third is choice, recognizing that you always have options, even when it feels like you don't. The fourth is discipline, choosing the strategic response over the emotional one. The fifth is consistency, making this practice automatic through daily repetition. I practiced these gates religiously. When provoked, I would pause and ask myself, what response serves my larger strategy? When frustrated by delays, I would remind myself that patience is often the fastest path to victory. When faced with insults or criticism, I learned to see them as information rather than attacks on my character. The transformation was remarkable. As I gained control over my internal responses, my external influence multiplied exponentially. Soldiers began to trust my judgment because they saw I was not driven by impulse. Allies respected my counsel because they knew it came from strategic thinking, not emotional reaction. Even enemies began to fear me more, because they could no longer predict or manipulate my actions through psychological pressure. This internal mastery became the foundation for every other principle I would develop. You cannot read situations clearly when your emotions cloud your perception. You cannot position yourself advantageously when anger drives you to poor choices. You cannot inspire others when you cannot govern yourself. The mirror taught me that situational control is an inside-out process. Master yourself first, and the world becomes infinitely more manageable. Once I had mastered myself, I discovered that every situation contains invisible currents, hidden forces that most people never perceive, but which determine the outcome more powerfully than any visible factor. Learning to read these currents transformed me from a good tactician into a true master of control. I carry with me always a weather vane, not for predicting storms, but as a reminder that the most important forces are often the ones you cannot see. Wind shapes everything, yet touches nothing directly. Similarly, the hidden dynamics in any situation, the unspoken tensions, the underlying motivations, the shifting allegiances, these invisible currents determine what becomes possible and what remains futile. The lesson came to me during what should have been a routine march through neutral territory. My army was moving through a valley that our scouts had declared safe, but something felt wrong. I could not name what troubled me, yet every instinct screamed danger. The peasants we encountered were polite, but their eyes held secrets. The merchants seemed too eager to direct us along specific routes. The very birds seemed to avoid certain areas of the forest. Most commanders would have dismissed these subtle signs, but I had learned to trust what I call the strategic sixth sense, the ability to perceive patterns below the surface of conscious awareness. I ordered my army to halt and make camp. Despite being only hours from our destination, that decision saved 3,000 lives. During the night, our hidden scouts discovered a massive ambush waiting in the narrow pass ahead. 5 enemy armies, positioned to crush us from all sides. What had seemed like paranoia was actually my subconscious mind processing dozens of small signals that my rational mind had not yet organized into understanding. This experience taught me to develop what I call the 4 levels of awareness. The first level is the obvious, what everyone can see. Most people operate only at this level, which is why they are constantly surprised by events. The second level is the observable but unnoticed, the details that are visible but which most people overlook. The third level is the inferential, what you can deduce from patterns, even when the evidence is incomplete. The fourth level is the intuitive, the synthesis of countless subtle signals into strategic understanding. To master these levels, I trained myself to notice everything. In meetings with allies, I watched not just what they said, but how they positioned their bodies, where their eyes moved, what topics they avoided. When negotiating with enemies, I listened for what they did not say as much as what they did. When entering new territories, I observed the behavior of animals, the condition of crops, the mood of common people, all indicators of the true situation. I learned that people reveal their intentions through micro-expressions that flash across their faces before conscious control takes over. I discovered that changes in routine often signal hidden preparations. I found that those who protest their loyalty most loudly are often those planning betrayal. The weather vane taught me that influence, like wind, moves in currents. To control any situation, you must first understand which way these invisible forces are flowing. Then position yourself to work with them rather than against them. The greatest victory of my entire military career involved not a single sword being drawn. This campaign taught me that the highest form of control requires no visible effort, a principle embodied by the ceremonial sword I carried but never unsheathed during the conquest of the Yu territories. The situation seemed impossible. The Yu kingdom commanded a strategic mountain pass that we needed to secure trade routes. Their fortifications were impregnable, their army was well trained, and their leader was known for his stubborn pride. Every military advisor counseled a siege that would take years and cost thousands of lives. Instead, I chose to win through understanding rather than force. I began by studying not their military capabilities, but their deepest needs and fears. I learned that their kingdom suffered from a terrible drought. Their crops were failing, their people were hungry, and their treasury was nearly empty from importing grain. Their aggressive posture was not strength, it was desperation masquerading as defiance. Rather than attacking their fortifications, I attacked their problem. I secretly arranged for grain shipments to reach their starving villages through neutral merchants. I ensured that news of these mysterious benefactors reached the royal court. I spread rumors that a powerful ally was considering a formal trade relationship with you if only the kingdom could demonstrate its commitment to peaceful cooperation. Simultaneously, I positioned my forces in a way that appeared not but created undeniable strategic pressure. We built camps within sight of their borders, but engaged in obviously peaceful activities, training exercises, cultural performances, trade fairs. The message was clear. We were prepared for war, but preferred prosperity. The psychological effect was devastating to their resistance. How do you maintain fighting spirit against an enemy who feeds your people? How do you justify aggression against forces that invite you to festival? How do you rally soldiers to defend against neighbors who treat you as potential friends rather than conquered subjects? Within 6 months, the Yu king sent ambassadors requesting formal alliance. The mountain passes opened to our merchants. The strategic position we needed was secured. Not one life was lost. No treasure was spent on prolonged warfare. And we gained not just territory, but a genuine ally who served our interests for decades. This taught me the supreme principle of control. Make your desired outcome serve your opponent's interests as much as your own. When victory benefits everyone involved, resistance becomes irrational. When you solve problems rather than create them, people invite your influence instead of resisting it. The undrawn sword became my symbol because it represents power that achieves its purpose without needing to be used. The threat of force may create temporary compliance, but the promise of mutual benefit creates lasting cooperation. When you understand what people truly need, you can lead them toward outcomes that serve both their interests and yours. This approach requires more patience and creativity than simple force, but it produces results that endure. Conquests achieved through understanding last longer than those achieved through violence, because they are maintained by choice rather than compulsion. I learned the supreme importance of timing from an astronomical device. I still treasure the celestial calendar. This intricate instrument taught me that in strategy, as in astronomy, everything depends on understanding the precise moment when conditions align for action. The lesson came during the siege of Ko, where I faced an enemy force twice our size, defending an apparently impregnable fortress. For 3 months, we maintained our position, while my officers grew increasingly restless. They accused me of indecision, of wasting time while our supplies dwindled. What they could not see was that I was waiting not for divine intervention, but for the inevitable moment when multiple factors would converge to create opportunity. I had been tracking several patterns simultaneously. The enemy's food stores were diminishing according to a predictable schedule. Their morale was declining as news of failed relief attempts reached the fortress. Most importantly, I had calculated that the autumn rains would begin within days, flooding the river that protected their eastern wall. My officers saw only our apparent inaction. I saw the approaching moment when nature, psychology, and logistics would combine to transform an impossible assault into an inevitable victory. The key was not acting too early, when resistance would be strongest, nor too late, when the opportunity would pass. When the rains came, they flooded the river exactly as I had predicted. The eastern wall, built on foundations that assumed low water levels, became vulnerable to undermining. Simultaneously, the enemy's food supplies reached critical levels, and a final relief column was decisively defeated by our cavalry. In a single morning, 3 months of patient positioning culminated in absolute victory achieved within hours. This experience revealed to me the 3 phases of perfect timing. The first phase is preparation, creating the conditions that will make action possible when the moment arrives. This requires the discipline to work without visible progress, positioning pieces on the board while others question your inactivity. The second phase is recognition, identifying the precise moment when all factors align. This demands constant awareness and the wisdom to distinguish between the right moment and the merely convenient one. The third phase is execution, acting with absolute decisiveness when opportunity presents itself. Most people fail because they act in the wrong phase. They rush into execution before proper preparation, mistake preparation for permanent delay, or hesitate during the moment of opportunity. I learned to synchronize my actions with natural rhythms rather than forcing artificial timelines. The celestial calendar taught me that just as planets move in predictable patterns, human situations follow observable cycles. Conflicts have seasons of intensity and exhaustion. Alliances have periods of strength and vulnerability. Individual psychology has rhythms of confidence and doubt. Those who understand these cycles can position themselves to act when resistance is lowest and success is most probable. Patience became my greatest weapon, not passive waiting, but active preparation for the perfect moment. Like a farmer who plants at the right season and harvests when crops are ripe, I learned to work with natural timing rather than against it. This principle transforms ordinary actions into extraordinary outcomes simply by choosing the optimal moment for each move. Position determines power more than any other factor, a truth I learned through careful study of what I call the terrain map of power. This is not merely a geographical chart, but a strategic understanding of how physical and social positioning creates or destroys your ability to influence outcomes. I discovered this principle during a campaign where I commanded only 800 men against an enemy force of 3,000. By any calculation, we should have been annihilated. Instead, we achieved total victory by choosing our battlefield so strategically that numbers became irrelevant. The enemy occupied the valley floor, an apparently advantageous position with room to maneuver their superior forces. I positioned my army on what seemed like disadvantageous high ground, rocky terrain that limited our mobility and made retreat difficult. Every conventional military wisdom suggested this was tactical suicide, but I had studied this terrain for weeks, understanding features that my enemy overlooked. The high ground gave us visibility across the entire battlefield, allowing perfect coordination of our movements while the enemy operated blind. The rocky terrain that limited our mobility also channeled enemy movements into predictable patterns. Most importantly, the position I chose controlled the only water source for miles, a factor that would become decisive as the day wore on. When battle commenced, I did not attack. Instead, I used our positional advantages to control the pace and direction of engagement. We forced the enemy to attack uphill into positions we had prepared. We used our superior visibility to coordinate precise strikes against isolated units. As the day progressed and the enemy grew thirsty, their desperation increased while our strategic position became stronger. By afternoon, the enemy's numerical advantage had become a liability to many men competing for too little water, creating chaos in their ranks. While we remained calm and coordinated from our commanding position, they surrendered not because we had defeated them in combat, but because we had made their position untenable through superior positioning. This taught me the 5 principles of strategic positioning. First, always choose your ground, never allow circumstances to choose it for you. When possible, force others to come to you rather than going to them. Second, control key resources. Position yourself near what others need and far from what they can use against you. Third, maximize your advantages while minimizing your vulnerabilities. Every position has strengths and weaknesses that can be amplified or diminished through strategic placement. Fourth, think 3 moves ahead. Position yourself not just for current advantage, but for future opportunities. The best positions are those that become stronger over time rather than weaker. Fifth, understand that position is dynamical. Serves you today may handicap you tomorrow. So maintain the flexibility to reposition as circumstances change. In modern situations, these principles apply just as powerfully. In negotiations, the person who controls the meeting location, timing, and agenda often controls the outcome. In organizations, those who position themselves at the intersection of information flows wield influence regardless of formal title. In relationships, those who understand the underlying needs and motivations can position themselves as valuable rather than demanding. The terrain map taught me that power flows toward advantageous positions, like water flows downhill, naturally and inevitably. Information is the ultimate source of control. A truth I learned through developing what I called the network of whispers, a sophistication intelligence system that gave me omniscient awareness of every situation before others even recognized what was happening. The power of superior intelligence revealed itself during what appeared to be an impossible diplomatic mission. I had been sent to negotiate with the Wei Kingdom, whose ruler was notoriously unpredictable and had already executed 3 previous ambassadors from other states. My life depended on understanding not just his official position, but his hidden motivations, secret fears, and private pressures. Before I ever entered his court, I spent months building intelligence networks throughout his kingdom. I recruited palace servants who overheard private conversations, merchants who traveled between cities and gathered rumors, even his own generals who had become disillusioned with his leadership. I learned that his aggressive posture came from desperation. His treasury was empty, his southern borders were under threat, and his own nobles were plotting against him. More importantly, I discovered his deepest personal fear, that history would remember him as the ruler who lost his ancestors' legacy. This single piece of intelligence became the key to our entire negotiation. When I met with him, I spoke not of submission or tribute, but of how alliance with us could secure his dynasty's eternal glory and protect his kingdom from those who truly threatened it. The negotiation that others expected to end in my execution instead resulted in a treaty more favorable than we had dared hope. The intelligence I had gathered allowed me to speak directly to his real concerns rather than his public position, transforming a potential enemy into a valuable ally. This experience taught me the 5 sources of strategic intelligence. The first source is direct observation, what you can see and hear personally. This is the most reliable, but also the most limited. The second source is human networks, people positioned to observe what you cannot. These must be cultivated carefully, and their motivations understood clearly. The third source is pattern analysis, looking for trends and cycles that reveal underlying dynamics. People and organizations behave predictably over time, and these patterns often reveal future actions before they are consciously decided. The fourth source is contradiction analysis, identifying gaps between public statements and private actions, which often reveal true intentions. The fifth source is environmental intelligence, understanding the broader context and pressures that shape individual decisions. I learned to process this intelligence through what I call the truth filter, systematic method for distinguishing reliable information from rumors, propaganda, and wishful thinking. Every piece of intelligence was evaluated for source credibility, internal consistency, and confirmation through multiple channels before being acted upon. The network of whispers taught me that knowledge multiplies power exponentially. With perfect information, even weak positions become strong. Without accurate intelligence, even superior forces can be defeated through strategic blindness. Those who control information flow control the situation itself, because they alone understand what is actually happening beneath the surface of events. I carry with me a stone shaped by flowing water, flowing riverstone, which taught me the most profound lesson about maintaining control through adaptation. Water appears weak, yet carves through mountains, yielding to every obstacle, yet ultimately overcoming all resistance through persistent, intelligent flexibility. This principle saved my entire army during the campaign that nearly ended my career. We had been pursuing enemy forces through unfamiliar territory when suddenly we found ourselves trapped in a narrow valley with enemy reinforcements blocking both our advance and our retreat. Our original strategy was now impossible. Our tactical position was hopeless, and panic was spreading through the ranks. My officers urged immediate assault on the weaker position ahead, believing that bold action was our only hope. Everything in my warriors' training screamed for decisive battle, but I had learned to flow like water around obstacles, rather than crash against them like waves against stone. Instead of attacking either position, I completely changed our entire approach. We abandoned our pursuit mission and transformed from hunters into traders. I ordered my men to lay down their weapons and bring out the goods we carried for provisioning. Within hours, we had established what appeared to be a traveling marketplace in the valley. The enemy forces, expecting battle, were confused by our commercial transformation. Local villagers, drawn by the prospect of trade, began arriving with food and information. Through these interactions, I learned of mountain paths that our maps did not show, routes known only to local shepherds that would allow us to bypass both enemy positions entirely. Within 3 days, we had not only escaped the trap, but emerged behind enemy lines in a position that allowed us to cut off their supply routes. What began as our greatest defeat became their complete encirclement. By adapting completely to new circumstances, rather than rigidly pursuing our original plan, we transformed certain destruction into decisive victory. This taught me the 4 phases of strategic adaptation. The first phase is recognition immediately, identifying when your current approach is no longer viable. Most people persist with failing strategies because they cannot admit that circumstances have changed. The second phase is acceptance, releasing attachment to your original plan without losing sight of your ultimate objective. Your methods must be flexible even when your goals remain constant. The third phase is creativity, generating entirely new approaches that fit current reality rather than desired reality. This requires setting aside conventional wisdom and thinking beyond standard solutions. The fourth phase is implementation, executing your new strategy with the same commitment you had to the original plan. Flowing Riverstone taught me that strength comes not from rigidity but from responsive resilience. Water never fights the shape of its container, yet eventually reshapes every vessel that holds it. Similarly, the most powerful strategies are those that adapt perfectly to circumstances while maintaining persistent pressure toward objectives. True masters of control understand that flexibility is not weakness, it is the ultimate expression of strategic intelligence. Those who can change everything except their core purpose will outlast those who change nothing until circumstances destroy them. The general's seal I carried represented more than authority. It symbolized the principle that you cannot control external situations until you first achieve unity of command within your own forces. This lesson came to me through the most dangerous challenge a leader can face: a mutiny brewing within my own ranks. I had inherited an army demoralized by previous defeats and riddled with divided loyalties. 3 different factions existed among my officers, each following different strategic philosophies, each secretly believing they could lead better than I could. Rather than commanding through fear or attempting to crush dissent, I chose to create unity through shared understanding and common purpose. The crisis reached its peak during our march toward the key territories. My scouts reported that enemy forces were positioning for ambush, but my officers could not agree on our response. The first faction wanted immediate retreat to defensive positions. The second demanded a frontal assault to demonstrate courage. The third proposed elaborate flanking maneuvers that would take weeks to execute. As we debated, precious time slipped away and our danger increased. That night, I called together all my senior officers around a single map. Instead of announcing my decision, I shared all the intelligence I possessed and asked each faction to explain not just what they wanted to do, but why their approach would serve our ultimate mission. For the first time, they had to defend their positions with strategic reasoning rather than mere preference. What emerged was remarkable. As each group articulated their logic, they began to understand the wisdom in other approaches. The retreat faction realized that withdrawal without engagement would damage morale permanently. The assault faction acknowledged that frontal attacks against prepared positions waste lives unnecessarily. The flanking faction admitted that complex maneuvers require more time than we possessed. Together, we developed a fourth option that incorporated elements from all 3 approaches: a strategic withdrawal that would draw the enemy from their prepared positions, followed by a rapid assault against their exposed flanks once they committed to pursuit. This plan satisfied everyone's core concerns, while serving our mission more effectively than any single approach could have achieved. The results exceeded all expectations. Not only did we avoid the ambush and defeat a superior force, but my officers became genuinely unified around shared strategic thinking rather than mere obedience to authority. They had participated in creating our strategy, so they implemented it with intelligence and initiative rather than blind compliance. This experience taught me the 3 pillars of unity command. The first pillar is shared understanding, that everyone comprehends not just what they are supposed to do, but why they are doing it and how their actions contribute to larger objectives. The second pillar is collaborative decision-making involving others. in developing strategy so they become invested in its success, rather than merely responsible for its execution. The third pillar is distributed leadership, empowering others to make intelligent decisions within their areas of responsibility, rather than requiring constant direction from above. When people understand the mission and feel ownership of the strategy, they will adapt and respond appropriately even when circumstances change unexpectedly. The General Seal taught me that true authority comes not from the power to compel obedience, but from the ability to inspire others to think and act strategically toward shared goals. I learned the deepest truth about control through studying what I call the mask of perception, understanding that reality matters far less than how people perceive reality. Those who master the psychology of influence can reshape situations without changing a single physical fact, simply by altering how others interpret what they observe. This revelation came during the siege of Shao, where I faced my most psychologically sophisticated enemy, a commander who understood that battles are won in the mind before they are fought on the battlefield. His forces were smaller than mine, his position was weaker, yet he had convinced his soldiers they were invincible, while simultaneously undermining my army's confidence through masterful psychological manipulation. He would send us gifts, wine and delicacies, with messages praising our courage and expressing regret that such noble warriors would soon die for an unworthy cause. He arranged for our scouts to accidentally discover preparations for elaborate funeral ceremonies, complete with thousands of coffins bearing our regimental symbols. Most insidiously, he spread rumors through our camp that I had been secretly negotiating surrender terms while publicly promising victory. I watched my soldiers' behavior change as doubt infected their minds. They began hesitating in training, questioning orders, looking for signs that their commander might betray them. Without a single battle, my enemy was destroying my army's effectiveness through psychological warfare more sophisticated than any physical attack. That night, I realized I was witnessing the ultimate demonstration of control through perception management. My enemy understood that people respond not to objective reality, but to their interpretation of reality. If he could control their interpretation, he could control their behavior regardless of actual circumstances. I decided to engage him on his own psychological battlefield. Instead of defending against his attacks on our morale, I began reshaping the entire narrative of our siege. I arranged for intercepted letters to reveal that our enemy's confidence was actually desperate bluffing, that his food supplies were nearly exhausted and reinforcements had been delayed indefinitely. I staged training exercises that appeared to be preparations for multiple simultaneous assaults, creating the impression that we possessed overwhelming resources and sophisticated tactical capabilities. Most importantly, I began sharing detailed intelligence about the enemy's internal weaknesses with my officers, demonstrating that every psychological manipulation they had observed was actually evidence of our opponent's growing desperation. The transformation was remarkable. As my soldiers understood the true situation, their confidence returned stronger than before. They had been tested by the enemy's best psychological attacks and emerged more unified and determined. When we finally assaulted the city, we faced defenders whose own morale had crumbled under the weight of their failed psychological campaign. This taught me the 4 dimensions of psychological influence. The first dimension is narrative control shaping, the story people tell themselves about what is happening and why. The second dimension is expectation management, influencing what people believe is possible or likely to occur. The third dimension is social proof, leveraging the human tendency to follow perceived group consensus. The fourth dimension is authority positioning, establishing yourself as a credible source of information and guidance. The mask of perception taught me that the most powerful control operates at the level of assumptions and beliefs rather than direct commands or physical force. Speed multiplies control more than any other tactical element. A truth embodied by the swift arrow I carried, perfectly balanced for decisive action when the moment for movement arrives. I learned that momentum, once established, becomes a force that shapes situations independent of your continued effort. The lesson came during what became known as the Lightning Campaign against the Confederation of 5 enemy kingdoms. They had formed an alliance specifically to counter my growing influence, believing that their combined strength would overwhelm any strategy I could devise. What they failed to understand was that alliances create coordination problems that speed can exploit mercilessly. My intelligence revealed that their confederation existed more on paper than in practice. Each kingdom maintained its own command structure, supply lines, and strategic priorities. Their strength was theoretical. It would only become real if they had time to coordinate their massive resources into unified action. I realized that speed could prevent this coordination from ever occurring. If I could strike each kingdom before the others could respond effectively, I could defeat 5 enemies individually rather than facing them as a unified force. The key was moving faster than their ability to communicate and coordinate. Counter-measures. I divided my forces into 3 highly mobile columns, each capable of independent action, but coordinated through a communication system I had developed, using signal fires and swift messengers. While the enemy alliance was still debating which kingdom should provide overall command, my first column struck the easternmost kingdom with devastating precision. The attack was designed not just for victory, but for maximum psychological impact on the remaining allies. We captured their capital within 2 days, secured their treasury, and immediately sent proclamations to the other kingdoms announcing that any further resistance would result in similar treatment. Before the western kingdoms even learned of the attack, my second column was already moving against the central kingdom. The momentum became unstoppable. Each victory increased the speed of subsequent campaigns as enemy morale collapsed and their coordination disintegrated. What should have been a prolonged war against a superior alliance became a series of rapid conquests, completed in less than 3 months. Speed had transformed numerical disadvantage into overwhelming strategic superiority. This taught me the 3 principles of momentum warfare. The first principle is compression, concentrating maximum force into minimum time to achieve decisive results before opponents can adapt. This requires perfect preparation, followed by explosive execution. The second principle is cascade, designing each action to accelerate subsequent actions, creating momentum that builds upon itself rather than requiring constant renewed effort. The third principle is irreversibility, moving so quickly that opponents cannot undo your progress even if they eventually mount effective resistance. Once momentum reaches critical mass, it becomes nearly impossible to stop, because each attempt to resist only demonstrates the futility of opposition. I learned that hesitation is the enemy of control. Opportunities exist within narrow time windows, and those who act decisively when conditions align will achieve results impossible through slower, more cautious approaches. Speed does not mean recklessness. It means executing carefully prepared plans with maximum velocity when the moment arrives. The swift arrow taught me that in strategy, as in archery, perfect aim means nothing without the power and speed to reach your target before circumstances change. The art of appearing weak when strong and strong when weak is embodied in the illusionists. I carried a war fan used not only for signaling, but for creating the misdirection that makes victory possible without devastating conflict. True deception serves peace by making actual warfare unnecessary. I mastered this principle during the campaign, where I convinced an enemy army to defeat itself without realizing I had orchestrated their destruction. The kingdom of Jin had assembled the largest military force I had ever faced, 50,000 seasoned warriors commanded by their most celebrated general. Direct confrontation would have resulted in catastrophic losses, even in victory. Instead, I chose to win through strategic deception that would make them destroy their own capability while believing they were pursuing triumph. I began by appearing far weaker than I actually was, allowing their scouts to discover camps that seemed poorly defended and supply lines that appeared vulnerable. I wanted them to believe that quick, aggressive action would crush my forces before I could retreat or receive reinforcements. Simultaneously, I planted false intelligence, suggesting that I possessed secret knowledge of a treasure cache hidden in the mountain caves north of their position. Through carefully orchestrated rumors spread by merchants and refugees, I convinced them that I was using the campaign as cover for a treasure hunting expedition that would make me wealthy beyond measure. The deception succeeded perfectly. Their general, believing he faced a weak opponent, distracted by greed, divided his massive army into 3 columns. The largest force moved to attack my apparently vulnerable main camp. A second force moved to intercept my supposed retreat route. The third force, driven by their own greed, moved toward the mountains to claim the treasure before I could reach it. What they discovered was that my vulnerable main camp was actually a carefully prepared killing field. My retreat route led them through terrain where their numbers became a liability rather than an advantage, and the treasure cache they sought was nothing more than a series of rockfalls. I had prepared to trap their third column in narrow mountain passes. By noon, 3 separate enemy forces found themselves isolated, confused, and unable to support each other. The army that should have overwhelmed me through sheer numbers had been divided and maneuvered into 3 separate defeats. More importantly, they had done most of the work themselves, marching eagerly toward their own destruction because they believed they were pursuing easy victory. This taught me the 5 elements of strategic deception. The first element is credible weakness making. Your vulnerabilities appear real enough that enemies will commit resources to exploit them. The second element is appealing misdirection, offering targets so attractive that opponents will abandon sound strategy to pursue them. The third element is false intelligence, feeding enemies information that leads them to make decisions serving your purposes rather than theirs. The fourth element is timing, coordination, ensuring that all deceptive elements converge simultaneously so enemies cannot adjust when they realize the truth. The fifth element is ethical boundaries, using deception to minimize conflict rather than maximize destruction, making the enemy's defeat serve broader peace. The illusionist's fan taught me that the highest form of strategy makes your enemies cooperate in their own defeat, while believing they are pursuing their own advantage. Control over resources creates control over outcomes, a principle I learned through meticulous study of the quartermaster's ledger, the detailed record that taught me how abundance and scarcity become weapons more powerful than swords when properly understood and strategically applied. The lesson crystallized during a campaign where I commanded barely 3,000 men against an enemy force of 15,000, yet achieved total victory through superior resource management rather than tactical brilliance. The enemy possessed overwhelming numerical superiority, better equipment, and more experienced officers. What they lacked was understanding of how resources flow and how controlling these flows determines the outcome of any extended conflict. Had spent months before the campaign studying their supply chains, understanding their dependencies, and identifying the single point of failure that would cripple their entire war machine. Despite their impressive army, they depended on a single mountain pass for all supplies from their homeland. More critically, they had grown overconfident in their superior numbers and had not established alternative supply routes or adequate reserves. Rather than attacking their army directly, I focused my entire strategy on their supply line. I positioned small, mobile forces to harass their supply convoys while avoiding direct confrontation with their main force. I arranged for local populations to hide or destroy food stores before the enemy could requisition them. Most importantly, I secretly negotiated with the mountain tribes who controlled the pass, convincing them to close the route in exchange for favorable trade agreements. Within 2 weeks, their massive army began to weaken from within. Soldiers grew hungry, equipment went unrepaired, and morale plummeted as they realized their leaders had no solution to the supply crisis. The very size that should have been their advantage became their greatest vulnerability. More men meant more mouths to feed and more equipment to maintain with dwindling resources. When I finally engaged their main force, I faced an army that was physically weakened, psychologically defeated, and strategically trapped. The battle lasted less than a day because their soldiers were more concerned with finding food than fighting enemies. Superior resource management had transformed overwhelming enemy strength into decisive weakness. This experience taught me the 4 pillars of resource control. The first pillar is dependency mapping, what your opponents need to function, and identifying their most critical vulnerabilities. Every organization, every individual, every strategy depends on certain resources without which it cannot succeed. The second pillar is flow management, controlling the movement of resources rather than just their accumulation. Often, disrupting supply lines is more effective than depleting stockpiles. The third pillar is efficiency maximization, more impact with fewer resources through superior planning and execution. When you can accomplish objectives with minimal expenditure, you maintain resources for future opportunities. The fourth pillar is reserve building, maintaining surplus capacity for unexpected challenges or opportunities. Those who operate at maximum capacity have no flexibility when circumstances change, while those who maintain reserves can adapt and respond to new situations. The quartermaster's ledger taught me that true strategic power comes not from accumulating the most resources, but from understanding how resources create dependency and using this understanding to shape outcomes without direct confrontation. I learned that multiplying your control through strategic partnerships often achieves what individual effort cannot, through studying the Treaty Scroller diplomatic agreement that taught me how shared control frequently leads to greater individual power than attempted monopoly. This principle revealed itself during the most complex political crisis of my career, when 7 independent kingdoms threatened to unite against what they perceived as my growing dominance. Each kingdom alone posed little threat, but their combined forces would have created an overwhelming alliance specifically designed to destroy my influence. Rather than fight this coalition, I chose to reshape it. I began by analyzing what each kingdom truly needed versus what they claimed to want. The Eastern kingdoms needed protection from barbarian raids that their individual armies could not repel. The Western kingdoms needed access to trade routes that I controlled. The Mountain kingdoms needed engineering expertise to build infrastructure that would connect them to broader markets. The Southern kingdoms needed military advisors to professionalize their forces. Instead of viewing these needs as weaknesses to exploit, I recognized them as opportunities for mutually beneficial partnerships. I approached each kingdom individually, with proposals that would serve their genuine interests, while also advancing my strategic objectives. To the Eastern kingdoms, I offered military cooperation against barbarian threats in exchange for basing rights that would extend my defensive perimeter to the Western kingdoms. I proposed joint trade ventures that would enrich both parties while creating economic dependencies that served my long-term influence. To the Mountain kingdoms, I provided engineering assistance that improved their capabilities while establishing my technicians as permanent advisors in their courts. Most importantly, I structured these agreements so that each kingdom's partnership with me also created benefits for other allied kingdoms. The Eastern kingdom's military cooperation helped protect the trade routes that enriched the Western kingdoms. The Western Kingdom's commercial success provided markets for Mountain Kingdom products. This interconnected structure made the entire alliance stronger than the sum of its parts. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, the coalition designed to destroy my power had become a network of allies competing to strengthen their relationships with me. Rather than facing 7 enemies, I now commanded resources and influence spanning 7 kingdoms, far more power than I could have achieved through conquest or coercion. This taught me the 5 principles of strategic alliance building. The first principle is mutual benefit, ensuring that every partnership serves the genuine interests of all parties, rather than extracting advantage from weaker partners. Sustainable alliances are built on shared prosperity rather than exploitation. The second principle is complementary partnering with those whose capabilities enhance your own rather than duplicate them. The most powerful alliances combine different types of strength rather than simply adding similar resources. The third principle is interconnected value, structuring partnerships so that allies benefit from each other's success, creating network effects that strengthen the entire coalition. The fourth principle is flexible commitment, maintaining loyalty to shared objectives while allowing tactical flexibility in implementation. Rigid alliances break under pressure, while adaptive partnerships evolve to meet changing circumstances. The fifth principle is exit strategizing, ensuring that partnerships can be modified or dissolved gracefully when circumstances change, preventing temporary alliances from becoming permanent dependencies. The treaty scroll taught me that individual power has limits, but collaborative power can reshape entire regions when properly orchestrated through strategic alliance building. The most profound lesson about control came through my greatest defeat. Symbolized by the phoenix feather, I carry a reminder that losing control temporarily can lead to greater long-term mastery when you understand how to rise stronger from apparent destruction. This truth revealed itself during what nearly became the end of my military career. I had grown overconfident after years of victories, believing my strategies were infallible and my position unassailable. When the Kingdom of Yan launched a surprise attack using tactics I had never encountered, they destroyed half my army and scattered the remainder across hostile territory. In a single day, everything I had built seemed lost. The immediate aftermath was chaos. My surviving officers questioned my leadership. Allies began reconsidering their commitments, and enemies sensed weakness like predators detecting wounded prey. Every instinct screamed for immediate counterattack to restore my reputation. But years of strategic discipline had taught me that crisis demands the opposite of instinctive reaction. Instead of rushing to recover what I had lost, I used the forced pause to analyze what the defeat had revealed about weaknesses in my approach. I discovered that success had made me predictable. My strategies had become formulaic. My intelligence networks had grown complacent, and my alliance structures had become dependent on my personal strength, rather than mutual benefit. The crisis forced me to rebuild everything from first principles, but with the wisdom that only failure can provide. I developed new tactical approaches that incorporated lessons from my defeat. I restructured my intelligence operations to prevent future surprises. Most importantly, I transformed my leadership style from personal dominance to distributed resilience, ensuring that my cause could survive even if I could not. The rebuilding took 2 years, but when I emerged from this period of apparent weakness, my capabilities far exceeded what they had been at my previous peak. The armies I now commanded were more flexible, the alliances I forged were more durable, and the strategies I employed were more sophisticated precisely because they had been tested against failure and refined through adversity. When I finally confronted the Yan forces again, they expected to face the same predictable opponent they had defeated before. Instead, they encountered a strategist who had learnt from defeat and emerged stronger than ever. The campaign that followed became one of my most decisive victories, achieved not despite my previous failure, but because of the wisdom it had forced me to develop. This experience taught me the 4 stages of crisis recovery. The first stage is acceptance, acknowledging the full scope of damage without denial or minimization. You cannot recover from problems you refuse to see clearly. The second stage is analysis, understanding not just what went wrong, but why. Your previous approach was vulnerable to this type of failure. The third stage is reconstruction, rebuilding with improved designs. Rather than simply restoring what existed before, crisis provides opportunities to address fundamental weaknesses that success would never have revealed. The fourth stage is integration, incorporating lessons from failure into all future strategies, ensuring that temporary setbacks contribute to permanent improvement. The phoenix feather taught me that those who fear failure will never achieve greatness, while those who learn from failure become undefeatable. Control is not about avoiding every setback. It is about ensuring that every setback makes you stronger. The bridge of time I carried symbolizes the eternal connection between ancient wisdom and modern challenges, proving that human nature remains constant even as circumstances evolve, making strategic principles as relevant today as they were 25 centuries ago. In today's workplace, the same forces that shaped ancient battlefields determine who rises and who falls. Consider the executive who masters self-control through my 5 gates practice, maintaining composure during hostile board meetings, while competitors reveal weakness through emotional reactions. Or the entrepreneur who reads invisible currents in market sentiment, positioning their company advantageously before trends become obvious to others. The principle of winning without fighting translates directly to modern negotiation. I recently observed a business leader who resolved a potentially destructive merger dispute by discovering that both companies shared the same fundamental need: access to emerging markets. Neither could penetrate alone. Instead of fighting over market share, they created a joint venture that gave both parties what they truly needed while eliminating the conflict entirely. Strategic positioning applies powerfully in organizational politics. Those who position themselves at information crossroads, where different departments, projects, or strategic initiatives intersect, wield influence regardless of formal title. Like controlling high ground in ancient warfare, controlling information flow in modern organizations creates natural advantages that compound over time. The intelligence principles I developed for warfare now guide successful leaders who build networks throughout their industries, understanding not just what competitors announce publicly, but what pressures drive their private decisions. Modern intelligence gathering happens through conference conversations, social media analysis, and relationship building rather than spies and messengers. But the principles remain identical. Adaptation remains crucial in rapidly changing markets. Companies that rigidly pursue original business plans often fail when circumstances shift, while those that maintain strategic flexibility, like water flowing around obstacles, find new paths to the same objectives. The most successful modern leaders change everything except their core mission when external conditions demand it. Resource control manifests in modern contexts through platform strategies, supply chain management, and talent acquisition. Technology companies that control essential platforms can influence entire industries without owning traditional assets. The principle of controlling what others need rather than accumulating what you want remains as powerful today as in ancient campaigns. Alliance building has become more sophisticated but follows the same fundamental patterns. Modern strategic partnerships, merger strategies, and ecosystem development all depend on creating mutual benefit rather than extracting one-sided advantage. The most successful companies build networks where partners' success reinforces their own position. Even deception translates into modern competitive strategy through misdirection about market intentions, resource allocation, and strategic priorities. Companies routinely appear weak in markets they plan to dominate, while appearing strong in areas they intend to abandon. Using strategic ambiguity to shape competitor behavior, personal relationships follow these same patterns. Those who understand timing know when to address conflicts and when to let tensions resolve naturally. Those who practice strategic positioning place themselves where they can provide maximum value, while maintaining personal autonomy. Those who build intelligence networks understand the real dynamics in their social and professional circles. The bridge of time proves that fundamental human nature never change, so only the context evolves. Fear, ambition, pride, and need drive decisions today exactly as they did in ancient times. Those who understand these eternal patterns can navigate any situation with strategic clarity. As our journey together concludes, I place before you the student's seal, a blank seal, ready to be carved with your own authority. The wisdom I have shared becomes meaningless unless you transform it into action, and action without wisdom leads only to repeated failure. You now possess the same principles that guided me through decades of strategic challenges. You understand that true control begins with mastering yourself, flows through reading invisible currents, and manifests through positioning, timing, and intelligent action. You have learned that the highest victories require no visible conflict, that adaptation overcomes rigid strength, and that apparent defeat can become the foundation for greater triumph. But knowledge alone changes nothing. I have given you maps, but you must choose to travel. I have shown you principles, but you must develop the discipline to apply them consistently. I have shared strategies, but you must build the character to use them ethically and effectively. The responsibility is profound. These principles can transform your life, your relationships, your career, and your impact on others. They can also corrupt you if you forget that true strength serves others rather than merely advancing yourself. Use this wisdom to create value, solve problems, and build something worthy of the strategic mastery you now possess. Begin immediately. Choose one situation in your current life where you feel powerless or reactive. Apply the principles, systematically read the invisible currents, position yourself strategically, gather intelligence, adapt to circumstances, and act with decisive timing. Transform that single situation through strategic thinking rather than emotional reaction. As you develop these capabilities, remember that mastery comes through practice, not theory. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to apply strategic principles. Every challenge becomes a chance to strengthen your strategic instincts. Every setback becomes a teacher that refines your understanding. Most importantly, remember that the ultimate goal of control is not domination, but harmony, creating situations where everyone can succeed, where conflicts resolve through understanding rather than force, where your influence serves the greater good rather than merely personal ambition. 25 centuries ago, I carved my seal into history through strategic wisdom applied with moral purpose. Now it is your turn. The blank seal awaits your unique mark, your personal application of these eternal principles to the specific challenges and opportunities of your time. Carve it well. The world needs leaders who understand true control, not the crude manipulation of force, but the elegant orchestration of circumstances toward beneficial outcomes for all involved. Your strategic mastery begins now.